Welcome to Reading Rural YAL, where we talk about all things rural YA literature and to the rural authors who write it. I'm your host, Dr. Shay Parton, and I'm excited to talk to you about today's topic at hand. If you're a teacher, student, or community member in a rural community, my hope is that the content here honors you and your experiences by discussing and analyzing books that can serve as a mirror for you. If you're an urban or suburban teacher, student, or community member, this series is for you too, and I hope that it can provide nuance to the stereotypical depictions of rural people so often seen in popular media. So come on in, and let's get to it. The refrigerator door is open. That's the first thing you notice. And not for cleaning either. It's opened ajar, as if a person or the ghost of a person still stood there casually deciding what to take for dinner. Shelves overflowing with white wine and sandwich meat sliced, fruits and fancy cheeses, all in a state of decay. The inside of the refrigerator is blue. There's that much mold. Blue and brown and green and maybe even a little black, dots and spirals out of control like tendrils reaching across walls and shelves and even the refrigerator's sides in a wave. It's coming for you, whatever this is, and for a moment you think about slamming the door. You have your gloves. It'd be safe. You're not a detective. You never worked for CSI, FBI, no association with three-letter names where they could have trained you to work with the things, but still, you've seen enough police procedurals made for TV crime to know. Never touch the scene. Do not alter it. Do not clean it. Do not change one single thing until you understand what happened. Until the truth is evidence collected, fact and proof, story assembled, then told. You know better than to touch a scene. These shows, these movies, they belong to before. The before the something, the before the nothing, or sometimes just before. But either way, you move along. You do not shut the door, even if the stench is overwhelming. So overwhelming you wonder if it'll keep you from discovering real clues. If scent, if smell, were how all this began. The something, the nothing, made of odors both innocent and maleficent. If smells, all smell, any smell, could tell you how or where they went, then the stench coming out of that refrigerator right now would keep you from ever knowing. Take all other smells over, and you would die. Sweat and breath and pheromones, everything that made you gone. Gone like the people who lived here before, and then you would never know. Were there other people in the world? Were you still a person? Have you disappeared? You will not shut the door. You go forward toward the living room now. You're not quite sure what you expected. This isn't the first time you've done a home inspection like this. Each job a little different, a pause, a feeling, in medias res, life continuing gone. Sometimes it's guitars left out on their cases, picks rattling inside, record needles button the end of 45s, books left open, letters not signed, evidence of life, life everywhere. There's an almost storybook quality to it, the empty space, or so you've trained yourself to believe. Like King Arthur's court, Ramandu's table. Maybe they're all asleep. Maybe the people are asleep except they're not here. There's nobody here, just like there was nobody at the last place and the place before that and every place before it, and all you can find are empty shells. All you can see is the gone, remnants and belongings, and again with that smell. Sure, it's a refrigerator here, but at the last place it was cat fur, and tomorrow it'll be an unflushed commode, and no matter how long you go, no matter how long you move among these things trying to find their people, it will never smell like death. They aren't dead. They're just gone. Hello, hello. I hope y'all had a wonderful holiday and got to spend some quality time with loved ones. I also hope that your new year is off to a great start. Mine's going pretty good so far. We were able to travel home to the farm in Indiana and got to experience a white Christmas, which is always a treat, especially since winters in Texas are usually pretty lackluster in that department. So it was a good one for us, and I hope it was for you too. I wanted to get this series out a little earlier than what I've been able to, but I enjoyed having the time off to spend with my kids, walking around the farm, going for golf cart rides, riding in the Kubota, getting in the tractors. They had a blast, and so did I. And so I really appreciated the break. But I'm excited to be back because I am here today to talk to you about the short story collection by Terena Elizabeth Bell, and it's called Tell Me What You See, and it is so genius. I am a sucker for experimental work. I love when authors do things with their craft to make form reflect content. That's one of my favorite things. And so this collection does that in spades. It's absolutely incredible. I did, though, want to mention that it's a little bit different than a lot of what I usually review on here. Belle herself is a rural outmigrant. She's originally from a small town in Western Kentucky, but she now lives in New York, New York City. And several of her stories in this collection feature rural characters and places, but interestingly, they aren't explicitly stated as such in those stories. She knows that they're rural, and I think that rural readers will recognize them as rural, but she doesn't explicitly come out and say that some of her characters and some of the places that are featured in these stories are rural. And so I think that makes space for some really interesting conversations about whether or not and how rurality needs to or doesn't need to be named, or, you know, how and whether or not readers pick up on it. So anyway, the stories here aren't technically YA either, but I think that they are definitely suitable for teen readers. So even though they're not YA in the way that we would traditionally think about it, I would still use it with my, you know, my high school students. And so I think that they definitely can be used in high school classrooms. And so because of that, I'm going to go ahead and share them here, or, you know, talk about them on this show. There's one story that features a young character, a sort of child protagonist of sorts, and it's the last story, Tell Me What You See. And so that one in particular I think is really powerful, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But anyway, it's a really good collection. I would definitely read it with young people, and so I'm going to talk about it because it's my show and I can do what I want. So anyway, I became aware of Belle's work through some Silas House tweets we engaged with, and I'm so glad. Through her tweets, I was able to read some of her work and was thrilled when she reached out to me to review this story collection. I really appreciate what feels like to me the comeback of the short story. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe argued that it was the best form because it can be finished in a single sitting and doesn't require the reader to leave the world of the story before they finish it. So the short story collection, I feel like, is really becoming a popular format. It's fabulous for English teachers too, because it allows students to engage with multiple texts in a short amount of time. So you can deal with different themes, you can pair them, you can have students read multiples and talk about different devices and craft, and I would absolutely use this story collection to teach craft. But anyway, so it's really great for English teachers, which is another reason why I wanted to include it on the show. On top of that, again, this collection is super experimental, and I absolutely love that. And the way that Belle plays with text features like font colors and font placement, as well as the inclusion of images and hashtags and memes, makes for some really, really exciting opportunities to talk with students about digital literacies and how we read and interact with text. The collection features 10 stories that contemplate various aspects of the human experience and living, especially during and after the pandemic. So, Welcome Friend, which you heard in the opening of this episode, is the first story in the collection. Then comes The Fifth Fear, which is kind of a speculative story and includes experimentation, really cool experimentation with font color. Then comes #Corona Life, so it uses the space of the story, the page of the story, in really, really interesting ways, using 3 columns to explore rural and urban experiences in and responses to COVID. New York, March 2020 is kind of a spatial and multilingual poem about experiencing COVID in Manhattan. And then regression. Oh my gosh, y'all. Regression is still thinking about that story gives me goosebumps. It's an experimental examination of the progression of Alzheimer's, and like I seriously cried when I read it the first time, and I get goosebumps every time I talk about it. The next story is 23,195 New Yorkers and counting, which is another perspective of COVID in New York. Privacy Station is another kind of speculative story that considers the future of farming and the planet. I Go to Prepare a Place for You is the next one, and it is an exploration of living with cancer. Esther is kind of a country retelling or translation of that particular biblical story, which I loved a lot. And then Tell Me What You See is the last story, and it's an exploration of and sort of attempt to make sense of the January 6th insurrection. So they're also fabulous in terms of the function of place. Hashtag Corona Life is especially fascinating for considering how place influenced perspectives of COVID and precautions folks would or could or wouldn't or couldn't take. The story is told 3 columns. One column features a rural perspective, another on the opposite side of the page, an urban perspective, and then in the middle column features the experiences and perspectives of the main character of the story, who's a rural outmigrant. And even more so, there's the consideration of digital spaces through Bell's use of hashtags and memes and online news stories. The use of physical space in the story and its connection to physical geographical spaces is absolutely genius. That story is so incredible, and I hope that you get this collection, and I hope that you read it because it's so good. I'm still thinking about it. I've read it like 2 or 3 times, and I want to go back to it because I think that there's so much there to think about. The title story, Tell Me What You See, explores and examines the insurrection, like I said before, and how people, especially children, are influenced by the sources, by sources outside of themselves when making meaning of like major world events, which I think is perfect to use in a high school classroom, especially thinking about themes of patriotism and nationalism and what's the difference between those two. And there's so many connections that you could co-teach with social studies, and I'm going to take some of those up when I do the teaching ideas video for this. So just stay tuned for that. I already talked about regression. Still, man, that story just leaves me in awe. It's so brilliant. It really is. And so powerful and poignant. And yeah, you got to get this collection. You got to read that story. So what she does is like, it's almost like blackout poetry, but she like takes a paragraph and she makes it like the onset stage of Alzheimer's. So it's like this character tells this story, this memory that she has. And then the paragraph goes through the stages of Alzheimer's, and through each stage stuff gets removed, but there's still a story there. There's still, it still makes a coherent thought. And man, that end stage statement that's left is just, it still gets me. It still really gets me. So again, I can't say it enough. Just please get this collection and read this story. So powerful. And then place, especially in its connection to cultural practice and political landscape, including the assumptions that we make about those things, are a major part of really all of these stories. So when it comes to how place functions, I think that there are really interesting conversations that you can have. But even outside of place, like there are so many powerful themes that exist in the stories in this collection that I would definitely have it in my classroom library, and I actually already requested that Purdue buy it. Anyway, we talk about all of that and more in the author talk that will be at the end of the series, so make sure that you check that out. But this collection is an important demonstration of how we're always reading and writing through place. So I hope you'll check it out and consider using it with your students. There's a link in the description if you're interested in picking up a copy for yourself or your classroom. The next episode of this series will talk about some ideas for how this collection could be used as part of secondary English curriculum, so definitely stay tuned to that. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and keep it a viable endeavor for me, it'd be great if you would like and comment on the YouTube episode. You could talk about what you liked most or what you walked away with. It'd also help if you'd subscribe to the channel. You can also head over to the Support Us page on the Literacy in Place website. There you can learn about all the different ways you can support this work. Like, you can like and follow the website itself, find out where to engage with us via social media, and go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or you could shop our storefront on bookshop.org to get the book featured in this episode or any other books that catch your eye. You could also buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com and donate once or set up a recurring donation. All of this would be immensely helpful in keeping this show going. So thanks a bunch for doing what you can. Well, that's it for this episode. Until next time, y'all come back now, would ya?